Predator becomes prey in the Florida Everglades as hundreds of hunters descend on the Sunshine State to catch and kill as many Burmese pythons as possible.
Something strange is going on in the swamps of Florida. For years, people thought Burmese pythons were the greatest danger, swallowing deer and even alligators whole. But now, reports are pointing to something far worse. An invader no one saw coming. Burmese pythons have transformed the entire ecosystem of South Florida. After arriving here as seemingly innocent pets, these snakes have overrun their new environment in just a few decades. And one that doesn't just prey on a few animals, but reshapes entire ecosystems from the bottom up. Scientists tracking the situation are stunned at how quickly the damage appears and how little can be done once it spreads. And the most unsettling part, this threat is already here, moving quietly through Florida's waterways, while most people don't even know it exists. Alarm in the water. Florida's wetlands have always been home to strange and resilient creatures. But recent alerts from state and federal agencies reveal something new pushing its way into these fragile waters. Officials have confirmed that a non-native predator is spreading through freshwater systems, forcing managers to call on the public to step in as early eyes and ears. The concern is based on verified observations, logged records, and an increasing number of reports that point to a single conclusion. The state's waterways are now under growing pressure from an invader that was never meant to be here. The first traces of this animal in Florida can be traced back to 1997 when biologists identified it in canals and drainage systems near Tampa and Miami. At first, the detection seemed limited, and many thought the situation might remain a localized curiosity. But distribution maps, surveys, and follow-up reports over the years have told a different story. From that initial entry, the species has continued to spread, steadily and quietly, moving from one drainage to another until multiple counties now show confirmed populations. State researchers and agency staff emphasize that the real challenge lies in the animal's ability to establish unnoticed until numbers are already high. Unlike some invaders that are instantly visible because of their size or behavior, this one slips beneath the surface and blends into habitats that are already difficult to monitor. Officials from the U.S. Geological Survey's Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Program have highlighted that confirmed sightings are almost certainly an undercount. The animal thrives in environments that are rarely sampled, making it possible for populations to exist for years before being documented. That gap between reality and official records is why managers are sounding the alarm now. In January 2025, a new round of public notices went out across Florida, urging residents and anglers to report any encounters through official channels. The guidance directs people to submit observations through the USGSN database, the EDDDMPS tracking system, or by calling the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's hotline. These reporting tools are the frontline defense in tracking how far the species has advanced. Without real-time data from the public, scientists say containment is virtually impossible. Officials stress that this is not about raising panic, but about raising awareness. The appeal for help has been published in state advisories, university outreach material, and local news reports that frame the issue as a collective challenge. A notice from the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences explained that even photos or brief descriptions from bores and fishermen can be useful. With so many waterways, canals, and wetlands stretching across Florida, no single agency can cover the ground. Ordinary residents who spend time near the water are often the first to notice when something unusual shows up. Local confirmation has stressed the urgency. Several counties have reported fresh encounters, some near urban centers and others in rural stretches of swamp. The variety of sites suggests that the spread is not isolated to one pathway. Some biologists point to the possibility of aquarium releases in earlier decades. Others point to the animal's own ability to cross short distances of land or survive in tough conditions as an explanation for its expansion. While the specific introductions may never be traced with certainty, what matters now is that the invader is here and its footprint is growing. Evidence from distribution data further strengthens the case. The USGS maintains detailed records of non-indigenous aquatic species across the country, and their Florida maps clearly show how the range has widened since those first detections in the late 1990s. The dots on the map, once clustered in narrow zones, now appear scattered across wider parts of the state. Each confirmed dot represents both a warning and a reminder that once an invasive species establishes, removing it is rarely possible. For the public, this means that awareness campaigns are no longer theoretical. Flyers, digital alerts, and field trainings have been circulated to anglers and environmental groups, reminding them of the need to watch closely for unusual fish in their nets or traps. Conservation officials remind people that failing to report unusual catches can have cascading effects both on fish populations and on the ecosystem as a whole. The chapter Florida finds itself in today is one of vigilance. The warnings are based on nearly 3 decades of data, records, and agency confirmations. The opening fact is clear. An invader first spotted near Tampa and Miami has now become a statewide problem. And with agencies asking for public help as recently as January 2025, it is evident the battle is only just beginning. The eel that kills. The creature at the center of Florida's latest ecological warnings is actually a fish with traits that seem designed for survival in extreme conditions. Known scientifically as Monopa species, the Asian swamp eel is far from an ordinary freshwater fish. It is an air-breathing mud-burrowing predator that thrives where other species fail, giving it a serious advantage in wetlands, canals, and marshes. From a biological standpoint, the swamp eel is built for resilience. Unlike most fish that rely solely on gills, it can breathe air directly, allowing it to survive in oxygen-poor environments. This ability means it can stay active in stagnant waters and even endure droughts that would wipe out entire populations of native species. Reports from field researchers describe the eel burrowing deep into the mud when water levels fall, effectively sealing itself in until the rains return. In some cases, insiders note that the animal has been observed wriggling across damp ground to reach new water bodies, crossing distances that other fish could never manage. Another troubling feature is its tolerance to a range of conditions. Certain populations have shown the ability to tolerate brackish or slightly salty water, a trait that widens its potential range quite a bit. Scientists emphasize that this adaptability gives the eel opportunities to spread not just within marshes and canals, but also into estuarine areas where fresh water meets the sea. In practical terms, it can push boundaries that normally act as natural barriers for fish. Its behavior as a predator only adds to the concern. The Asian swamp eel is a generalist, meaning it will feed on almost anything it can fit into its mouth. Crayfish, small fishes, and decapods are all fair game. By preying on such a wide range of organisms, the eel disrupts food webs and reduces the diversity of aquatic life in invaded habitats. In reports from monitoring sites, scientists describe it as a vacuum feeder that leaves far fewer prey species available for native fish and waiting birds. Because it targets multiple categories of prey, the ripple effects can reach every level of the ecosystem. Controlling the eel is another obstacle. Traditional fish traps and nets have limited effectiveness. Field crews often report difficulties capturing them because of their ability to burrow into mud or wriggle free from common gear. Insiders have pointed out that even electrofishing, a method normally reliable for stunning and collecting fish, has limited results with this species. Its ability to hide in sediments makes it particularly hard to monitor, let alone remove. For wildlife managers, this means detection is usually reactive, possible only once populations are already well established. Geographically, the Asian swamp eel has already secured a foothold in the United States. Florida is still the most heavily affected state with multiple drainages now showing established populations. However, it is not alone. Records show that Georgia has confirmed populations as well, and Hawaii has long dealt with its presence. Risk assessments published by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service point out that the eel's biology makes it a high-risk invader for warm, wet regions of the country. While its spread beyond those states is not yet confirmed, the potential is there. In fact, climate suitability models suggest that much of the southeastern U.S. could support its survival if introductions happen. Early monitoring and a hidden damage. When scientists first began tracking the presence of the Asian swamp eel in Florida's wetlands, there was little indication of just how quickly the ecosystem would shift. Early monitoring efforts focused on Taylor Slough, a key part of the Everglades system, where researchers had already established long-term data sets on fish and invertebrate populations. This allowed them to compare conditions before and after the invader took hold, and the results were stark. According to data published in peer-reviewed reports, the overall richness of fish and decapods in Taylor Slough declined by roughly 25 once swamp eels became established. That means a quarter of the diversity vanished within the span of the monitoring period. For wetlands that rely on a wide range of small species to support larger predators, this drop pointed to a reshaping of the food web itself, where certain prey disappeared and others were left to dominate the system. The changes became even more alarming when biomass was examined. Total biomass of small fish and decapods, the organisms that form the foundation of the aquatic food chain, fell by about 68. Nearly two-thirds of the prey mass that once fed native fish, reptiles, and birds was gone. For biologists, this decline signaled a loss of energy flow through the ecosystem. Without enough prey to transfer nutrients upward, larger predators face immediate pressure and their populations cannot be sustained in the long term. One of the most troubling details involved prey important to nesting waiting birds. Monitoring revealed that the biomass of these specific species plummeted by nearly 80. For birds that depend on concentrated prey during nesting season, such as hare and ibis, that level of decline is catastrophic. Insiders working with Everglades restoration programs noted that waiting birds are already a sensitive measure of wetland health and any disruption to their food sources translates directly into reduced breeding success. If the prey base collapses, entire bird colonies can fail to raise their young. The altered community that followed was described as dominated by a narrow group of small taxa. Grass shrimp and bluefin killish became disproportionately abundant compared to other species. This might sound like stability on the surface. At least something survived. But ecologists warn it is the opposite. A food web heavily reliant on just a couple of species is fragile. If anything were to affect grass shrimp or killifish populations, there would be little left to support the system. Reports emphasize that biodiversity is insurance, and once it erodes, recovery becomes much harder, if not impossible. What makes the situation even more concerning is the persistence of these changes. The data did not show a short-term shock followed by a rebound. Instead, the new community structure with reduced richness and biomass persisted for over a decade at monitored sites. This indicates that once swamp eels become established, the ecological shifts they cause are long-lasting reconfigurations. Scientists familiar with the data sets point out that these impacts effectively rewrite the baseline conditions of Taylor Slough. Future restoration work rather than aiming to recover what once existed may have to operate under a permanently altered system. Reports from field teams emphasize that these impacts are not immediately obvious to the untrained eye. To a casual observer, water levels and vegetation in Taylor Slough may look unchanged. Fish still dart under the surface and birds still forage along the edges. Yet the numbers tell a different story. Fewer species, less biomass, and less energy available for the larger animals that define the Everglades. Now, here's where it gets really tense. If these patterns repeat elsewhere, the cumulative impact across Florida's wetlands could be devastating. A silent collapse. As we have already mentioned, data from monitored sites show declines across nearly every category of aquatic prey once swamp eels arrive. The richness of fish and decapods drops by about 25. That means 1 out of every 4 species that used to be present vanishes from the system. The total biomass of small fish and decapods shrinks by nearly 68, cutting away 2/3 of the energy available for higher predators. And most concerning, the biomass of species critical to nesting waiting birds collapses by about 80. This translates directly into fewer successful nests and smaller breeding colonies. What starts as a hidden reduction in prey availability ripples outward into visible losses of bird life and ultimately into the larger Everglades ecosystem. The mechanism driving these collapses is unusual, which makes the eel a particularly insidious invader. Unlike native fish, swamp eels do not disappear when water levels fall. Instead, they persist through seasonal dryomes by burrowing into mud and breathing air. When other fish retreat into deeper pools or die off in shallow marshes, the eels stay behind, consuming what remains. For prey species, this is devastating. Times that once offered safe recruitment are now periods of relentless pressure. Insiders explain that swamp eels effectively erase the seasonal breathing room that prey species relied on for survival. For comparison, Florida has already witnessed the destruction that an invasive predator can cause with the Burmese python. Those snakes introduced through the pet trade have driven mammal populations in the Everglades to historic lows. Raccoons, opossums, and bobcats have all suffered losses ranging from 80 to 99 in documented surveys. The impact of swamp eels is not identical, but it is parallel in magnitude. Where pythons reshaped the terrestrial food web by removing mammals, swamp eels are dismantling the aquatic one by consuming prey species at the base of the wetland system. Both represent a collapse in ecological structure. But swamp eels carry the added danger of working invisibly under the water where the scale of their effect is not immediately apparent. But what exactly happened? How and why Florida released something that kills all the animals in the swamp and it's 100 times worse than pythons? The answer is simple. By accident. Official records suggest that the original introductions may have been linked to intentional releases decades ago, likely from the live food trade or aquarium trade. Insiders believe swamp eels were dumped into canals and ditches when they were no longer wanted, a scenario common with other invasive fish species. From there, they found their way into swamps and wetlands. The claim that they are 100 times worse than pythons undoubtedly captures the sense among some researchers and managers that the eel's impact is broader and more insidious. While pythons visibly remove mammals, swamp eels hollow out the prey base silently, undermining the food supply for countless species from fish to birds to reptiles. This difference in pathways is crucial. Pythons strike at higher trophic levels, wiping out populations of visible mammals that people notice. Eels strike at lower trophic levels, destabilizing the foundation of the system. The effect is just as dangerous because an ecosystem without a functioning base cannot sustain its top predators. When prey disappear, everything built on top of that base faces collapse. So, while the eel is not literally killing all animals in Florida's swamps, the evidence does show, however, is localized dramatic restructuring of the Everglades aquatic food webs with the potential for ecosystem-level functional loss if spread continues unchecked. The fear among insiders is that if swamp eels reach new drainages, the declines documented in Taylor Slough will repeat again and again, leaving behind wetlands stripped of diversity and energy. In practical terms, Florida now finds itself managing yet another invasion. The python story is already notorious. The swamp eel story is quieter. But the numbers reveal a collapse of equal consequence. That is why officials are raising alarms, urging vigilance and warning that if the pattern continues, the Everglades as we know it could be permanently transformed by a fish that was never supposed to be there. Policy, ecology, and humans. When the first official monitoring reports on Asian swamp eels came in, they confirmed what scientists had suspected but hoped wasn't true. The populations weren't isolated or self-limiting. They were entrenched, common in affected sites, and nearly impossible to capture with conventional gear. Decades of fish surveys that had once shown predictable seasonal rebounds in the Everglades were now documenting permanent shifts. The disturbing part is that there are no reliable reversal actions on record even when managers applied aggressive trapping. The local change persisted. The system that had adapted to centuries of pressure from storms, droughts, and even human drainage projects now faced a threat it wasn't designed to absorb. Agencies including the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and state partners reviewed the situation and kept returning to one conclusion. Early detection is the only real option. By the time the eels dominate a drainage, restoring the old balance is not realistic. That is why public reporting became a first-line defense. The University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences launched campaigns urging anglers, bores, and even hikers to record any sighting. Online reporting portals and mobile apps now serve as informal surveillance systems collecting data to guide professional monitoring. The policy challenge is that the risk isn't confined to one corner of Florida. Federal risk assessments show that the climate match is high for the entire southeastern United States. Warm temperatures, plentiful waterways, and human-modified canals all provide ideal habitat. With documented impacts already clear in the Everglades, the debate is not about if, but about when other waresheds will face the same outcome. The overall risk to the contiguous United States is still under review, but internally, biologists warn that the window to contain the spread is closing. On the other hand, scientists inside the Everglades Restoration Program caution that if these effects repeat in larger drainages, the consequences could be sweeping. The aquatic food web, already stressed by altered water flows, would be restructured again. Nesting waiting birds that depend on dense pools of fish and crustaceans during the breeding season could see reduced reproductive success. For a region that has spent billions trying to recover iconic bird populations, the eel invasion threatens to unravel decades of effort. Beyond ecology, there are notes of concern for economics and public health. Small-scale fisheries, cultural harvests, and even bait collection practices could take a hit if swamp eels reduce local species diversity. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has also flagged an added risk: parasites. Historically, raw or undercooked consumption of the species has been linked with human infections in parts of Asia. While the risk level in Florida is still under study, officials list it as a potential public health concern. The broader policy path now taking shape is layered but cautious. Agencies call for expanding surveillance networks, funding targeted removal trials, and modeling spread under different hydrologic scenarios. Containment in uninvaded drainages is a top priority, as once the eels establish, history shows they stay. Public involvement is essential, not just through awareness campaigns, but via practical tools like reporting apps. In the eyes of insiders, every early detection buys time. Still, officials acknowledge the limits. Capturing swamp eels at scale is still an unsolved question. Chemical treatments risk collateral damage to native fish. Physical barriers can sometimes help in canals, but are impractical in sprawling marshlands. This leaves managers with a patchwork of partial measures, none of which erase the underlying problem. For local communities, the invasion feels distant until the impacts reach familiar waters. Some anglers are already reporting empty pools where they once caught small fish. Eco-hour operators dependent on the spectacle of abundant wildlife quietly admit concern about long-term trends. The Everglades is marketed as one of the last great wetlands of North America. But if the eel spreads unchecked, the ecosystem that draws tourists will look very different within a generation. That tension between the scientific urgency and the limited tools defines the current moment. Officials know surveillance without action feels inadequate, but they also know acting without evidence risks wasted effort and unintended harm. As a result, much of the work now focuses on targeted research, refining models, and building public awareness. The eels are a test of whether managers can adapt in time. In that sense, the aftermath is an open struggle, one where each new report, each sighting logged by the public, and each study on control methods shapes the path forward.